So obviously we've just we're going through COVID-19 at the moment. We had our first peak earlier this year, um, where there was a rise of domestic abuse cases that led to the domestic abuse bill. So I'd love to hear more about that, although we touched upon it briefly. And then since we might be going into a second wave, what can we learn from the first peak, and what can we do differently the second time round, if there are any sort of calls to action as well regarding that?
Yeah, the spike in cases that happened during lockdown was part of a global phenomena. The statistics vary, but country by country comparative analysis shows that it is something that basically happened worldwide. There are a number of factors that might be considered to influence this. Firstly, as we just emphasised, coercive control is actually a huge factor in domestic abuse, and obviously once the victim is in lockdown with a perpetrator, then the opportunity for that control to be sustained, maintained, reinforced is a lot greater. However, there has also been an increase in significant violent assaults during the crisis, during the lockdown. And if you look at these actually reinforce known triggers for domestic abuse. This includes, well, it's well known that domestic abuse increases every Christmas time. For example, so families are sort of shoved together. There may be financial burdens. There may be more alcohol. The World Health Organization had published a lot of data on the link between alcohol and increased domestic violence. And we've seen in statistics that alcohol use over lockdown increased dramatically. I think as much as 40%. You might have to fact check me on that, but all of these things combined with the economic pressures and uncertainty have led to a big spike. So in terms of, if I could go on to addressing what should be done about that, what lessons can we take going forward? I'm aware that I have yet to discuss the domestic abuse bill, so if we could circle back round to that and take it in two parts, as it were. But there are some very specific lessons that should be taken. Although, in a sense, what they are telling us is they're simply highlighting data that was already there. This week I attended a UN Women webinar in which they launched a data tracking tool which tracked COVID-related legislation across the world and cross-referenced it against domestic violence measures and with a sort of gender violence against women context. This is actually very important because it's real-time data and it's coming through. So governments can be using this now they should be looking at this now to see what is being done and what can be done, what other countries are doing, and what is possible. The UK has been fairly proactive, actually, in the fact that it covered measures that not simply measures that address abuse as a crime, but there are a number of cofactors that women in particular, and I'm aware that men are also victims of domestic abuse, but women account for 80% of victims. So that's why this is coming through. I'm not trying to ignore male victims, but there are other factors, and that is that women, whilst many women account for quite a large percentage of the workforce, they're often in temporary or insecure jobs without contracts. So their contribution to the home finances is particularly put under risk during the pandemic. Also, they already take on the burden of unpaid care work, and during lockdown, I think the lesson that comes through from that is that to address domestic abuse, you need to look much wider. You need to look at economic issues as well as just criminal or health issues, and in fact, I think one of the things that came through from the data gathered by the UN is that 1 to 2% of GDP is lost due to domestic abuse on average worldwide. So the cost is absolutely huge, and the remedial action that could be taken, the cost of that is actually, in comparison, very small. So I think going forward, this is something that clearly needs to be addressed. It's not just about increasing measures in the criminal justice system. It's providing wider sort of fiscal stimulus and economic measures, benefits, welfare benefits that allow women to safely leave and lead independent lives. And these are things that should be long-term measures looking ahead post-COVID. One of the interesting things that is coming through, but still need further research, is that since the first lockdown ended, abuse has not stopped. If you go back to coercive control as being the fundamental basis of abuse, then this makes a lot of sense, because during lockdown, perpetrators will have experienced complete freedom. They would have been able to control their partners in a way that perhaps they would not otherwise be able to do in normal times. So whilst we saw a spike in incidents during lockdown, more interestingly, what we've seen, and again, data is only just coming through, so it's something that needs further investigation. But the end of lockdown has not caused this to end. Again, economic, financial worries have been cited as a possible cause. You might also consider that people that have upped their alcohol intake will have trouble during that. But if you get to the heart of coercive control, then what you will be seeing is that perpetrators suddenly their opportunity to control has been removed. People were allowed to start moving around again freely. Their victims could leave the house, you know, and that is not going to be easy for a perpetrator to handle. You know, inside themselves, they'll be like, wow, you know, I have had all of this control. I've been, you know, my partner has been doing exactly as I've told them. They haven't, you know, they haven't met with anyone. There's no interference. And suddenly that's all gone. So the end of lockdown has not necessarily meant an end to abuse. And that's a lesson that must be taken seriously going forwards. In terms of what has been on offer to victims during lockdown, that's a slightly different a slightly different situation, because that relies on remote support. I think it was the 11th of April that Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, announced the measure for victims using their hashtag "You're Not Alone." However, one of the problems of this is that we have, it doesn't account for what is a massive divide of digital poverty in our society. And I'm just scrolling through here to try and get a percentage for you. But it is, if you could just bear with me while I find this. Yeah, okay. Yeah, 1.9 million households don't have internet access. Many before lockdown relied on, say, free public spaces to access the internet. In lockdown, with whole families together, people have been forced to choose between buying data or buying food. And not only that, but research suggests that 11.7 million people lack essential digital skills. Now, you may think that that just covers older generations, which are known to, you know, be less active on the internet. But it, in fact, covered a much broader demographic than that because of the poverty divide. And the Cambridge Centre for Housing and Planning research at the University of Cambridge had been conducting research on digital exclusion. And what they have found is that there are huge and deeply rooted inequalities in how the population has access to digital and technological means of support devices. 22% of the UK population lack digital skills, and that's long before the COVID-19 outbreak. 51% of households earning between 6,000 and 10,000 had internet access, meaning that 49% of households in that income category had no internet access. So how are such people going to access remote support if they do not have the means to do so? That has not been addressed. That is a conspicuous failure. The government pledged support for support services to improve their technological digital devices so that they could kind of try and reach out. But if the people they're trying to reach out to can't participate, then that means nothing. Furthermore, those organisations, only £1 million of the £2 million pledged ever made it to the frontline services anyway. A lot of them had to close. They had to. I know that the Southern Black Sisters group that work with domestic violence victims in London, they had to completely close their email answering services. There are reports that of agencies and support workers desperately trying to, drive across and distribute laptops to workers at home. And that's one side of the equation. That's the side of the equation the government tried to address, and even that didn't work. So basically, nothing is going to happen unless digital inequality is addressed at a citizen level. And more than that, it's providing a safe space. It's improving technology. To phone a support line whilst you're basically in lockdown with the perpetrator of abuse against you could put you at risk of harm. It's not going to be an easy thing to do. Do you lock yourself in the bathroom and hope that they don't come banging on the door asking what you're doing? Can you use the internet safely? Many sites have quick close buttons that allow you to, very quickly close the window if you feel at risk. But this cannot make up for a shortfall in face-to-face intervention in support services, and I don't think there's an easy way to address that if there is a second lockdown in the time that we have. That is a lesson that needs to be taken forward long term, and it will necessitate huge changes at a social level, at an educational level, at a economic level.